Welcome to RC4 Wireless, and we're excited to have the University of Rhode Island join us on our podcast today to talk about how they utilize RC4 wireless gear in their recent productions. Let's go ahead and jump on in.
Hey everybody, my name is James Horban. I am the Assistant Professor of Design and Theater Technology here at URI.
Hello, my name is Sam Cote. I was one of the student master electricians on one of the shows that we did this past year.
My name is Haley Ahlborg, and I am the master electrician for the theater department at URI.
My name is Meghan Turner, and I was the student master electrician for both By the Way, Meet Vera Stark and Into the Woods.
Let's talk about the first production here that I think it's the first production you've used RC4 gear in, period, at the university. Rocky Horror Picture Show. Give me a sense of what you did, how you used it, and how it affected the show.
For Rocky Horror, that was our first big musical back out of the gate, kind of recovering from pandemic times. And we had also just been awarded a Champlain grant. So what the Champlain grant allowed us to do is bring in a package of Luster 2s and Elation Artiste Picassos to really start to modernize the technical offerings that we can light our stages with. And for me, the core reason that grant has been a game changer for us is that we were allowed to bring that technology to our student base. You know, being a master electrician and learning how to hang and focus lights is no longer just plug it into the square hole and point it where you want it. There's a lot of networking that has to be known, power calculations. You know, these technicians nowadays, you almost have to be electrical and data network engineers for each system that we're putting up on stage. And a core component of that methodology for me was starting to integrate RC4 into our show use. It's a product that I've used for many years. It's been super reliable, and it's become such a staple for being just a great little problem solver of a product that I knew that we had to get one in. So we started with just getting a small package of just a dim 4, just a little 4-channel dimmer. That way, if we needed it for just some little par 16s on a rolly thing, it can do that. If we needed it for some RGBW LED control, we could use it for that. So for Rocky, we knew that was the time to kind of sneak that into the show budget. And a lot of that show was dedicated towards getting the RC4 added into inventory. And as a designer, for lighting that show, we went with a, very engaging lighting design that was very loud and in your face, just as Frank and his castle is. And I knew that when we were in our initial design conversations, as soon as Janet is flipping through the TV monitor to look at the different security cameras, we really needed to enhance the actress's response to finding that channel of Brad and Frank and give her something to react to. So it wasn't just I'm staring at a blank box and then I'm acting of what I'm seeing. So I knew that we wanted to have, just the most audacious hot pink come pulsing out of that TV once she hit that channel. And, that was one of the early practical problems that we've solved. It's whatever the TV station is, it's going to have a pink light in it. And, we'll have to have some other sources in there so that we can have some more neutral colors flickering a little bit. So I was starting to go down the road of, we'll just get a cheap little RGBW engine to throw in there and it'll be fine. And then the more that the set design developed, it became obvious that needed to be a wagon. And then because of the way the ground plan laid out, that wagon needed to store, 40 feet upstage in the connector for when it wasn't being used. So having an umbilical wasn't really an option for that anymore. And that's when I started having a conversation with Haley. And it's like, Haley, I wonder if we can just get an RC4 with our show budget for this. We've got the lusters from the grant package now. We've got the movers in there. I can sacrifice gel choices and template options to try and get that going. And that was what motivated that product entering our inventory, was that specific moment in the show.
Having the actual change to the pink light and being able to feel that change, I assume, really helped out the actress in her moment, and also the audience feels that too. Why did you pick RGBW as opposed to RGB?
For the first point of how it helped support the actress moment, it was something that when we got to that moment in tech, we made sure that we programmed the first draft of that over a break, so that the first time we ran through it, we would have something that just had the effects and the color pre-built for the actress to see and respond to. And it just kicked her right in the face with the energy of that moment, and really helped her get into it. And also it was one of the biggest bring the house down moments in the show for just audience response, and just the comedic element that added. In terms of choosing an RGBW engine, that was an easy choice for us to make, just because it's something that I strongly believe in whenever, as a designer, I'm going through and making a choice for what type of engine to use. I always tell my kids, it's you want at least an amber or a white in there just to get that end of the spectrum. Granted, for this particular moment in the show, we went from just low, cool gray flickers to a hot pink. We didn't necessarily need it, but now we have that engine in our bookshelf of Frankenstein parts to build random cool stuff out of. So when we first started out seeing what kind of wireless components would be helpful to us, we picked up a few of the PowerSonic batteries. And we have some of the pretty big beefy ones, because we actually bought the batteries before we bought our RC4. We had a production fall of 2021 was Silent Sky, I believe. So for that production, we needed to have practical lamps that traveled from table to table, and the tables traveled around the space. And, at that point, we didn't have any sort of wireless anything. So I made the choice to just start to get, let's just get 4 PowerSonic batteries. We'll just get some 12 volts. We'll go with some of the larger ones just to get us into a high amp hour amount, just so that it's a better investment for the future. For the show, we could have gotten by with a 1 or a 2 amp hour battery, one of the little tiny PowerSonic ones. But since they were going to be built into the tables, we went with some of the bigger 7 amp hour batteries, and built some custom enclosures for them that then just wired to a little 2-gang box that had a light switch and an outlet attached to it. So crew would put the lamp on, plug it in under the table, flip the switch on. And that's how we got started with our batteries. And then we've just been using those for, pause for dramatic cuckoo clock. We've been using those PowerSonic batteries for most all of our wireless stuff. So for Vera, since we were driving a lot of practicals, we started with just 1 of the PowerSonics. And then we got about halfway through our first run, and we're just looking at that intermission look and just watching the sconces just fade and flicker away. And I remember leaning over to Sam and being like, "Hey, Sam, do you want to grab Megan and wire in another battery? Because I think we're going to need it." So those were the batteries that we used for the most part.
Let's talk about Vera.
Yeah. So by the way, Meet Vera Stark was mainly a 2-location set that was comprised of 3 turntables, the central being a larger turntable than the 2 side supplemental ones. And initially, back when we were starting with the set design, simple lighting designer me was like, "Oh, it's great. Like, it's just interior. We'll just throw some light on it. It'll be super duper easy." Set designer starts coming back with like, "What if we do 3 turntables?" And at one point there were periactori involved and lots of movement and rotation of things to switch between those 2 places. And it became evident pretty quick that it's like, okay, we have at least 8 to 12 practicals in here in 3 different turntables. And we only have, like at that point, we just had the DIM 4 to use. So we started with just getting a kind of like wish list of, for these 3 different turntables, how many practicals do I want on each one, so that I can just tell Haley, like, here's what I would absolutely love, and you can bang your head around for a little bit and then tell me what I need to cut. So we started with, knowing that the central turntable had the most practical elements on it, with some par 16 uplights for some of the Art Deco architectural features, and a few sconces, and then the center of the turntable was a big open entryway. So I really wanted to get some high side into that entry, and it was a pretty thickly built opening as well. So it was really hard to get light in and through with a flying masking wall behind. So it's like every scenic element just introduced another hurdle of where light can come from. So I knew that we wanted another few channels to just hide some more par 16s around the set. So we knew that we would use the DIM 4 for that unit, and we kind of designated a little pocket within the set that we could install all of that business. And that was very much our first big flexible use into RC4, I would say. Starting out with just an RGBW LED and a TV, not too complicated, pretty straightforward. Hey, look, the color of the wire even matches the little color on the unit. It's great. Whereas Vera required a little bit more of some kind of engineering of figuring out cable runs, how things would slice together, starting to get some exposure into WAGO connections and just different ways. Kind of those things that often can get, like, we take for granted that knowledge sometimes of just how to safely run some zip cord through a big scenic unit that moves, how to keep things secure, how to keep things out of the way, but also how to wire and build things for strike, so that as soon as it needs to come down, you can just pull, pop your connections, get it all back.
For your par 16s, were they halogen or were they LED?
They were LED because we knew that like the 4 column uplights, it's like, well, those are going to be on for about an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. And I just knew through some of my like past ME and lighting supervisor work that it's like, yes, I would love the fade of a halogen source on that, but I also don't want to build a wall of 12 batteries in the set to keep those going.
Where'd you end up hiding the 4DIM and the batteries?
It just so happened that part of the one side of the turntable was completely flat, parallel with the proscenium, and then just the other side of it had two wings that kind of moved downstage. So we had this little triangle alcove to kind of sneak ourselves into to hide everything. But during the show, so
Yeah.
it was a challenge, but you find your little nooks and crannies to hide things in.
And was it easily accessible for the crew to charge the batteries, or was it a fun adventure to get to the batteries?
Oh, it was a fun adventure.
It was a fun adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that magically happens.
Right.
All of a sudden you got to climb through things to get to the batteries and whatnot. I'm finding in more and more shows, and this is TV, film, theater, whatever, entertainment events. Wireless is really the way to go now, to have that flexibility to be able to just put a wireless unit in there and not have to worry about any wiring going across. That really opens up your abilities of what you want to do. Is there anything that you wish you could have done differently with it?
I think that one of the things that made like Vera challenging with that RC4 unit was the fact that the masking flats in the little alcove that we were hiding things in met in a very tight angle. So if one wall was flat in one rotation, the other one had a little bit of angle to it. They were only 4-foot flats. So we had to hide things in the wedge here, which in a drafting is fine. You look at it in the ground plan, it's like, yeah, it lives there. But when you get to the real life model, and it's like trying to work in a tight space like that, made it a little challenging. And, for me, I would have preferred having a Phoenix style connector just to make it easier for getting all of the wiring done and then just pop the connections that we have to do, which is funny because just a few days ago, another email came in from
Yep.
James of like, we now offer Phoenix style connectors on units. And it's like, oh, do you want to swap? Can we just do a straight trade in?
So this spring you did Into the Woods, and you had some fun things added in that production, a book and whatnot. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for our spring production of Into the Woods, our director, Tracy Miller, was really interested in conveying the power of story and kind of the importance of story that it can have in our lives. And a lot of her inspirations came from a lot of, some of the recent language that you hear about book bans, and just how in these few years that we've all had of, battling anxiety from the news daily, it seems, of the power of story to support and escape, but also to learn from and grow. So, with a musical like Into the Woods, you can't really just go about adding a bunch of stuff here and there. You can't interject lyrics. It's all pretty written beat to beat to beat, especially being a Sondheim. So we came up with the idea to have our set representative of just a book place that was in another time, not flat out like fairy tale bookcase with carved stones and everything like that. And that a lot of this storytelling would take place with our two book place employees during a small snippet of pre-show and then a small snippet before going into intermission, so that when the show started, we had one book place employee stacking books and going about their work, and the other employee would come in who ended up playing our narrator as well, and with headphones on, listening to news of their time, such as the last known unicorn going extinct, and debate over what can be taught in school as it relates to like fairies and their culture and things like that, that tied it into the story. So it wasn't blatantly, here's the news of the day, but that so you could understand and empathize with, like, these two characters are meant to be of our time, but of this place. And as our main character, our main prop lighting character of Book is exposed to be stalked, we hit it with a really intense special from a few of the movers, so that as the news swelled and became more threatening and menacing, we would have this Book call out to our book place worker. And as they picked it up and opened it, we really wanted that power of light to come out through it. And as that character transformed into the narrator, we made the choice that most all of the show, all of his lines would be being read from the book. So it was a prop that would travel with the actor for a large majority of the show. And, for Into the Woods Act 1, very happy, very golden. We knew that our palette was pretty fixed there. But as we started discussing how this kind of parallel messaging of fairy tale book place lines up with the plot points of Into the Woods, we identified that, there's moments that the book needs to be trying to push our narrator outside of their comfort zone. We start back in Act 2 with all of our characters saying that they're so happy, but we know that they're not, and they're wanting for more. So we really needed this book to be able to kind of have a conversation with our bookshop employee back and forth. So that's when, first little red flag for lighting designer goes up, and I shoot Haley a text, and it's like, I guess we know what we're using RC4 for this show. Gotta shove it in the book. And that's what got that whole project started, was just that need of our narrator being a book place employee who interacted with this story. And we needed a very flexible wireless tool to help tell that story and support that character.
Being a character with the book, was it changing color? Did you have intensity changes that needed to happen to bring it into the world? Or was it more of just an illumination that came from the book?
Initially, it was just an illumination and a color change. As the lighting design as a whole developed into more of an evocative, like almost modern dance style of atmosphere, we started using some more pulses, some intensity effects with it, just to give it some different options.
What kind of planning did you have to do for lighting up the book and making sure that, what kind of batteries selected and all that?
We knew going into it that we were going to need a lighter battery than what we had prior. So thinking of that, it became into a lot of research of what is the duration of the show and how long does this book need to be on? And then looking at what is the smallest, lightest battery we can find that holds that amount of amp hours. So that kind of became one of James's projects of just researching batteries and finding those. But which I can't recall which battery off the top of my head we ended up going with. But while that was happening, it was Haley and I just figuring out how many of these modules can we fit in this book, and then how do we get the book to kind of hold its own. So it became a sturdy prop and was easier to kind of use on the actor side, which became, building a little table, gluing the modules to the table, and then hiding the battery and the RC4 underneath it to make life a lot easier for everyone, and also just create that seamless look when you had it open.
Was there any kind of diffuser on top of the LEDs themselves, like an acrylic panel, or was it just the point sources aiming out?
We just had the point sources sticking out just to get the most amount of output that we could, which was a learning curve for the actor to never tilt his book down, but it is what it is, but we did want to get the most amount of output we possibly could out of them.
And I don't know if you had spotlights in your show. Was there any challenges getting this to punch over your spotlights, or were you lucky not have to worry about that?
So in the end, the output was a little less than I think was desired, just because the modules that we went with, I think they were on the lower end, maybe like 32 lumens or so per module, to where if we had gone through like some strip or something like that, we could have gotten it a little bit punchier. But once we kind of built up the prototype and we're like, here's the modules that we have, here's a mock-up of the table that Sam was talking about for how it can all fit together. Once we saw the output that we were dealing with, we were lucky enough to have that test before we went into queuing, so that as we went into building the show, we knew where we had to balance things. So the plot itself also was very dance inspired in terms of the tools that were within it. So it was pretty much only front for anything dealing with visibility. So we were able to really carve out the queuing so that our narrator was able to live in a darker bubble. But there were some moments where we just needed more light on the narrator themselves. And when you're talking about something happy going on in a book, if your main point of light is coming from underneath you, even if it's like a golden glow, it's hard for it to look happy sometimes.
Yeah.
So we did have to fill it out a little bit, and like having the color control of that was useful as well. Just if we had to do a cool fill for something and just shift the color a little bit more to read, we did have some balancing that we had to do there. And our actor who was playing this role also had a skin tone with a lot of underlying warmth to it. And there was a lot of kind of fine-tuning adjustments to getting the right color to read with that. So we, like before we started queuing, we did like, here's our golden book preset. It's on, it's golden. We hand book to actor, opens it, golden preset. It's like, oh, that doesn't look golden at all.
Yeah.
So we programmed it with some of that flexibility in mind. But a lot of the construction that Haley and Sam went into for building it were lessons that were kind of learned from Vera. Meghan gave a hearty chuckle when you were asking about the ease of getting batteries out. That was not an easy process for that show. So it was kind of a learning curve of, yes, you can put your batteries somewhere, but you have to think about how you're going to use them, how you're going to access them. If there's a gap in the drawing, it doesn't mean that Scenic won't cover that with a hard flat during tech when they realize that they've made a hole for themselves. And now you have to take that panel on and off every single night. So I think, Meghan was able to bring that input to the table of, hey, we've really got to be able to charge this thing easier. And, if we're building this little table with the modules on top, the battery and the RC4 underneath, and it has to fit inside of a book, that's one of those situations of you're trying to stomp a suitcase down, and we want to not have to open and close it 8 million times. So that's when Sam made the decision to, I think we hot glued it in the end, just the charging port for the battery, just so that we could just have a direct plug when the book was open to plug it in to charge it. And looking at the specs for the battery that we got, it was making sure that we had to disconnect the load when we did charge it. So again, it's like, all right, we built it so that we can just plug it in to charge it. Well, you still have to unplug it from the RC4 to actually charge the battery. So that's when we created a little bit of extra space. I remember it's like, Haley, your trunk is a magic Mary Poppins bag of just lighting equipment. You happen to have a low voltage switch in there. And she went looking for one, and Sam found a different, just normal switch in the electrics cage. And we just added a switch in line to the hot side of that so that we could both charge it without having to open it up, but also disconnect it from the RC4 with a switch in there.
Haley and Sam, can you talk a little bit about prototyping? Because prototyping, a lot of people skip over. And it was mentioned that you all prototyped the book in advance of actually building it or making a final version. How did that help solve problems, and what did you discover?
It was a lot of pre-planning on what does this book need to do, and it was and then looking at, okay, what hardware do we want to use, and then we created the entire circuit outside of shoving it in a book to make sure that this concept would work, and then with timing and budget, it's like we only have the one book. We can only we have to think this through. So it was doing the least amount of permanent options and trying to get it as permanent as we could without going too far and realizing that we're now stuck and can't solve it. So it was just going little step by step. And that's kind of where that table idea came in, was one to lift the sources closer to the edge of the book, but also we made it so it would fit just perfectly in there. So it was something that was removable, that if something were to go wrong, we could always just replace that and start all over. So it was creating this book-sized insert to prototype on, and then just set it into the book right before we start the tech process.
And repairability is something that a lot of people don't always think about. We're live shows, things happen, books fly across a room by accident. Having that ability to go in and repair something or fix something is always quite useful when dealing with live entertainment. You never know what's going to happen. So you've had your RC4 gear for about 2 years now. And is there anything any kind of project that you would love to try to use more RC4 gear in? Anything that you're like, ooh, this would be really cool to do?
I think investigating its use for things outside of just what we know and what we've used it for. It's proved such a versatile product that we know when it can reliably solve our wireless issues for, like, let's just shove an LED in something with a battery and an RC4 and it'll be great. But the more that we kind of go down the rabbit hole of seeing these other projects that people are doing with it, there's that happy little spark of like, oh, well, what if you do connect it to motors? How does that programming work? What does that open it up to? And for me as a lighting designer, I think that excites me because the more that I know, the more flexible tools that I'm aware of, the more I can pull those out when that situation applies for it. Like, it may not be a project that is used for a show that comes right out the gate or something that's driven from that. But just kind of expanding that toolbox out to some of those other options of pixel control, of being able to control when a cuckoo clock goes off on stage versus randomly, something to drive that mechanic, like, oh, that's a cool idea. So I think that's some of the stuff that I'm excited to dive a little deeper down into it. Is some of the kinetic controls, motors, pixels, things like that.
And Sam and Meghan being students, was it difficult to use RC4 gear, or did you feel like it was pretty comfortable to eventually figure it out and get into it?
I mean, there was definitely like a learning curve for me personally. I don't know about Sam, but it was not like the worst thing I've ever done by any means. But there was just like a natural learning curve that comes with, I mean, anything in lighting, especially. But
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I personally found it quite easy in terms of how it works and how you in the wiring process. I have experience with low voltage LED tape and those tiny screws. You just with it being so similar, you kind of learn it. But I'm also a huge fan of just keeping manuals, just downloading manuals and just having them to just try to get those. If I have a question, I can answer it myself by using the material given. It's also like super easy to do it that way. Just looking and finding what the answers to my questions.
I will also say that the learning curve was very interesting, and I had a lot of fun working with it, and the learning process was a lot of fun too.
Very cool. And Haley, as the department head electrician, in that, how does this change your life? Does it make your life harder, or do you think in the long run it's going to make your life easier?
I think after using it a few times, it does make things easier, and it's really interesting because James he brings in all these cool little gadgets that I personally have never seen into his designs, and just like Sam said, I download all the PDFs for the manuals, and I take like a little lunch break and read through all of them and go, wow, this is really cool. So I think it's all really interesting to use in the future and on different projects.
I want to thank the University of Rhode Island for sharing with us the projects that they've been working on. If you have any questions about their program, you can find a link down in the description. Now, if you have a unique, fun, exciting project that utilizes RC4 wireless gear and you want to share it with us, please use the email down below in the description and let us know. Thanks for joining RC4 Wireless. Make sure you drop a like, ring that bell, and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new tutorials coming out and how-to videos.